Hi, everyone. It's Andrea Ubel. I'm with the Alzheimer Society of York Region, and you have joined our webinar today called Living Safely in the Community, Understanding the Risks. We are having some slight technical problems, as everybody seems to have, but we're trying to remedy that. Our second speaker, Tamara, has ended up in the general audience. She's here now. There she is. Hi, Tamara. How are you? We're still waiting for people to join us. You are now one of our panelists here, so you should be able to share everything, which is great. I'm still waiting until Jamie gives me the thumbs up, and then I'll start the official introduction. You are in webinar mode, everyone. You can see us, but we can't see you. So if you're coming in, you are not visible on the screen and you are muted. We will be recording this session and it will be up on our website probably in about 10 days, 6 days, depends how long it takes us to convert it. And we're very excited this afternoon. We've got 40 people online now. We had about 95 people registered, so we're just going to wait a few more minutes. Because I've only got 101. We'll wait till 105 to start. How's that sound? So please have a cup of tea, sit back and relax. It's going to be an excellent talk this afternoon. And you'll see I have my shawl on because I'm a little cold. We got some really cold weather, and we hope everyone was safe yesterday during this storm. Nobody had any incidents. I've heard of friends getting stuck, and I had a friend fall down because they were walking on the ice. But they're fine. So it was a harrowing couple of days, I think, for a lot of people in Southwestern Ontario. And I've got a lot of family down in Southwestern and Windsor area, and a lot of people without hydro down there, and they're still without hydro because they took the brunt of the ice. So we are just a few more minutes and we will get started. While we're waiting, I would like to introduce a couple of people. Sarah, you can wave, Sarah. Sarah McLean, who is our First Link coordinator. She's going to be manning the questions, and we'll be asking the questions of our speakers. Well, the way today is going to run is we will have I keep calling her Dr. Professor June Andrews. I've been corrected on that. She will be speaking first, 40 minutes, approximately 10 minutes of questions, and the same with tomorrow. Then tomorrow we'll speak, and she is I can call her Dr. Tamara Daly. She will be speaking after, and again, about 40 minutes, about 10 minutes of questions or so. And then Jamie will be just wrapping it up, talking about the Finding Your Way program that this seminar is a part of. So I think I'm going to start officially. We've hit 50. So welcome, everyone. I'm Andrea Ubel. I'm Director of Programs and Client Services at the Alzheimer Society of York Region. And hopefully many of you are from York Region. York Region is that area north of Steeles to Lake Simcoe. Peel to Durham, we've got about 1.2 million people in the region, very diverse area. We are so pleased to receive funding yet again from Alzheimer Society Ontario, which receives money through the Ministry for Seniors and Accessibility for the Finding Your Way program. And one of the things that we've done for the last 5 years has either been hosting workshops, which we did for the first 2 years, and the last one popped up in my Facebook feed, which was in the February of 2020, just before everything closed down. And for the last 3 years, we've been doing a webinar series, and it's been really successful. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce June. June is our first speaker today. Professor June Andrews has been described as smart, politically astute, amused, and possessed of a razor-sharp intellect. Her independence means that she is at times confident enough to speak truth to power, and she goes against the grain of populist thinking in a way that often ruffles feathers. She is a Scot and trained as a nurse in Nottingham, England, before taking up a series of posts and moved from practice to policy making and strategic management and influencing government, the health services, and academia across the UK. She's also studied at the degree level in philosophy, law, and literature. Professor Andrews made ambitious things happen during her decade of directing Sterling's Dementia Services Development Center, and she's heightened public and professional awareness of the practical things that you can do to make life better for people living with dementia. And we're so pleased to have June with us. This is now her 5th appearance at the Alzheimer's Society 2 live. And now this is her 3rd appearance with us on Zoom. So I am going to pass this over to you, June. June is going to talk about families and risk. And so June, over to you.
Hello, thank you very much for that, Andrea. It sounds like a lot of things that I have done. I try to give the impression that I'm just 36 years old, but that's not going to work if I've done all those different jobs. I'm just going to share my screen now so that people can see my presentation. And Andrea could just confirm that I've managed to do that successfully.
You have, we can see you.
Great. So we talk about finding your way, and one of the places where it's really hard to find your way is through family dynamics when things are happening, when you're particularly caring for a person with dementia in your family. And it's one of the things that when I have families and people who come to me and they ask for help and they want to talk to me about the problems that they're having, I always imagine that the thing they're going to ask me about is something technical to do with dementia, you know, the latest news on pharmaceuticals, which if you're interested isn't particularly amazing news, nothing coming up soon. Or they're going to ask me about things about diagnosis, and you know that is getting better, people are getting diagnosed earlier. But it turns out they're not asking about that. What they want to talk about sometimes is what's happening in their family. And I end up, more than being a dementia expert, I end up being like a family mediator. And so it makes me think that some of the things that people who are listening might want to ask might be things that it's difficult to ask in front of people you know, or even in front of strangers. So at the end of the presentation, I will give my contact details. And that means you can email me afterwards with any questions that you have, either that were difficult to ask during the presentation, or if you're watching the recording of the presentation, something that you would have asked if you had been here at the time, or even just things you thought of afterwards. So I've been thoroughly introduced, but I like to put up this slide because this was a picture of me on my last visit to Canada. And the world has changed. I don't have a great appetite for traveling the world anymore, but the place I'm definitely coming to is Toronto. I'm definitely coming back. I have so many friends that I met through the Alzheimer's Society, and I just love being there. My main interest in this is being a relative and a friend to older people and people who are affected by dementia of any age. So let's talk about risk and decision making for people with dementia. Nobody wants to be treated like a child. Quite often, people who are living with dementia are regarded as, you hear this horrible phrase like they're having a second childhood, and that's because people with dementia sometimes not only have memory loss, which of course is a problem for many people, but it's not the worst problem. One of the things that happens is the person starts to lack judgment, things that they would never have done when they were in their full capacity as an adult. They may start to do those things. And the horrible expression that people use is like a second childhood. It absolutely is not a second childhood. Everybody who has dementia is an adult, and they're a person who has all their life experience. But what they start to do is they start to perhaps take risks that they might have done when they were less experienced. They start to perhaps make the kind of errors of judgment that you might have made in your younger life. And the really important thing is not to treat the person like a child, no matter how much it feels as if there's something adolescent about some of the risks that they might want to take. And the person with dementia, I know in Canada, you've got your Declaration of Rights of People with Dementia. Person with dementia has rights, and they have the right to make their own decisions as far as is possible. Now, the people who are listening here will know that capacity isn't an all or one issue. Someone might not have the capacity to make a really complicated financial decision like selling up their house or making investments, but they can still make decisions about where they want to go, what they want to eat. And, you know, the woman might decide that she's going to spend a ridiculous amount of money on shoes. And you can't say, oh, well, because she's got dementia, we need to stop her taking the risk of wasting her money. You need to know what risks the person always took. Perhaps she always spent a fortune on shoes, or perhaps she always wanted to and never had the courage. So knowing that the person can take risks is quite important. And also knowing what kind of risks they used to take. So here we've got a picture of a lady in her kitchen. She's going to be playing with sharp knives. You start saying, oh no, she's got dementia, she can't have those sharp knives. She's probably safer with a sharp knife than any of the rest of us because she's been handling knives in all her life. And when you go into somebody's house, you might think, you know, the hygiene in here isn't very good. You don't know what kind of risks with hygiene that person took before, and you can't make decisions unless you find that out. But when you're making decisions and you're trying to help a person with dementia make decisions about risk, you need to give the person time to think. And that includes picking the time when you're making decisions, because sometimes the capacity to make decisions varies throughout the day. And the person who wants to make their own decision may be better at that first thing in the morning when they're fresh. You know the person well, you know them best, so you know when they'll be best able to make the decisions they want to make. And what sorts of things do they want to do? Well, when families approach me, this is the sort of thing that's on the screen here that people ask me about. They might want to go out walking alone. I and my colleagues know that one of the really big issues is the question of driving and when a person should retire from driving, how risky it is for the person to continue driving after they've had a diagnosis. Looking after their own medications, that's an example where the person does not want to give up the independence, but there are lots of bits of kit that you can use that will help the person manage their own medications safely. And if you don't know about those things, we can talk about those things later if there are any questions. And always it's being said that when someone is diagnosed with dementia, it's really important for them to keep up their hobbies. But what if their hobby is something like machine turning with really sharp equipment? And take the gentleman in the picture here, you know, he might have had that woodworking hobby, but when his reaction times are slower, when he makes errors of judgment, are we going to start to say, no, he can't have his machinery, he can't do this anymore? We need to think about the things that the person might want to do. Using the kitchen, again, the kitchen's quite a hazardous area for any of us, but it could be that there are lots of things you can think of that you can do in the kitchen that would allow the person to do things which you might once have thought of as risky, and which you're able to help with assistive technology. Being left alone with grandchildren, that's another area where a lot of the value that older people bring to families is in childcare. And does it reach the point where you decide that the risk of the person being left alone with the children is too much, and also the risk of going travelling? So there are lots of areas that the person might want to act where you might have to have an issue. And so the interesting thing for me, as I was saying at the start, is what happens with the family dynamics of being concerned about those kind of risks. So in my analysis of the kind of issues that come up regularly, the kind of things that cause family fallouts, from previous presentations, I've listed the 10 things that people talk about most. And the first one here is disagreement about how much care is needed. It's not unusual to find one person, for example, you might have a daughter who is saying, you know, dad's starting to he's starting to lose his capacity to make decisions. I've seen him perhaps making, you know, lack of judgment when he's driving, you know, he's pulling out into traffic when he shouldn't, his reaction times are slower. And then the brother says, oh no, it's not a problem, dad's fine, he always was like that, he's always taken risks, we can't. So disagreement about how much care and how much supervision is needed is relatively common in families, and it can cause family fallouts. That's one of the things that I want to emphasize all the way through this, which is when you think about dementia, dementia is an illness that if the person doesn't die of something else in the meantime, they're going to die of the dementia. And after they have died, you're going to be left with your family, and you want to be the best family you can be for each other. So disagreeing and falling out with each other about things like that at this time is something to really try to avoid, because it's not what they would have wanted anyway. You know, the dad wouldn't have wanted the brother and sister to fall out over something like this. They wouldn't have wanted to have left that kind of legacy. So the other issue that sometimes causes family fallouts is when you've got one person who does the heavy duty of caring. One example I can think of, and it's actually quoted in one of my books, because it was one of the excellent people who I worked with in a previous job. And she was doing the heavy duty of caring. She was going to look after her mum every day after work, before she even went home to her own family. And eventually she found that this was quite a lot for her, quite tiring. Her other siblings lived quite far away. And so she made a decision that what she was going to do was call in some hired help to help with this, because she felt that her mum was not coping at home, that there were dangers. And then a short time after this, one of her sisters made a surprise visit. And she was furious to find out that there was a stranger in the house, and the stranger was familiar with her mum and was making free in the house. And there was a huge row about this. And so the sister who had been doing most of the caring said to me, I not only have to do all the work, but I have to report to this other silly woman as well, my sister. She's such a bag, she doesn't do anything, but she's full of opinions about what I do. And of course, I could have caused another pain to her by saying, it's as well to explain to others, communicate what it is you're going to do. Because that too would have been annoying, the idea that she's got to report to her sister as well as doing it. But when one person is doing all of the heavy duty, the danger is that they would end up doing things which other people are going to have opinions about, even if you think they're not entitled to have an opinion about it. The other thing that sometimes happens is that people are deliberately excluded from the decision making, where something that you find out where it's not just that the person is distant or isn't the person who's leading on it. The research that we have in the UK demonstrates that in caring, numerically the majority of carers are women, the women in the family. The majority of the women who are carers, the percentage of women who are carers is greatest in the middle-age group, when it's a sandwich carer with still child or young adult responsibilities and responsibilities for their parents, although the percentage of men who are carers increases after retirement age. That's when men start to increase in the numbers who are doing any form of caring. But the danger is that the person who's leading on it deliberately excludes other people from the decisions because they may have their own agenda about it. And another thing that causes family fallouts is when some people won't help. Again, if you can imagine, when there's a disagreement about stopping driving, one sibling, the sister thinks we really should get dad to retire from driving. The brother thinks we shouldn't. And actually there are three people in here, one of whom is another sibling, and that sibling says, well, it's up to you. I can't help with the decision. That person doesn't even help negotiate or mediate between them. And of course, people fall back on childhood patterns. Sorry, I've just gone back one. People fall back on childhood patterns because when you think about it, it may be that you never got on. It may be that you always fought and you always had rows. And suddenly, as adults, you're being asked to make decisions about things that can be financially quite big. There are things that can be emotionally really difficult. You might be making these decisions about one parent just after the other parent has died. You're still grieving and you're having to make a lot of really difficult decisions, and you've never had any experience of making decisions together. And although you think, well, children from the same family, they've had a common background, in many ways, even if you have siblings, you've been brought up in a different family. Take my family, for example. My sister was born to a young married couple who lived in a single room, madly in love and only one child to look after and hardly any money. My youngest brother was born into a family where he was an interloper. There were already three of us, and he came in and he was the baby who stayed at home long after we'd all gone away and started work or gone to university. So his experience of being a child in our family was quite different from my older sister's experience. And when you fall back into childhood patterns of how things were, it's not necessarily the case that you had a similar childhood. We also have problems with families where the aging person is resisting care. So that's when you perhaps need more people in the family to help persuade the older person that the time has come, or that the person with dementia requires care. And you do get toxic and manipulative older people. I know when I'm old, I'm going to be a sweet old lady and I'm going to do everything that my children or younger relatives want me to do. But you do get older people who never were particularly cooperative. You might find you have a son who just really doesn't want to have anything to do. He's very argumentative with his father, but when you look back, it may well be that they've always had a bad relationship and the older person has always been really difficult. Many of the family fallouts that I see are about money. It's just one of those things, and we can talk more about that on the way through. And so that's also about end-of-life care and executory, and about communication. I was talking to a family recently where one of the sisters was really impressed that her sibling sister had decided that she was going to build a bigger house and take their parents in to live with her. And she didn't realise until it came time at the end of life that her sister had actually taken all the money out of the parents' house and invested that in her own house. So it was all her money. So huge amounts of rows about money and about manipulation of finances before the older people had died. So the bottom line is communication. The biggest issue is about communication causing fallouts, because once people get used to an idea, if they're communicated with, then that's really helpful. So just to say again, the things to think about risk is, to what extent you can reduce risk, and we can talk about that in terms of, reducing the risk in the kitchen. You will have had previous chats where you've talked about things like bits of kit that can disable the hob on the cooker after a period of time. You can have all sorts of resources that will detect heat and smoke. There are lots of things that you can do when you're concerned about someone leaving the house. You can have sensor devices that will give you an idea of where the person is in the house and whether or not they've fallen. You can get locator devices for when people go out into the community. There are lots of things you can do to reduce or transfer the risk, but there may be some risks that you have to accept, because I know that when I'm an older woman and, by the time I'm 90, I have a 50% chance of having dementia, I'd rather be a free-range old lady with dementia than someone who's confined because people are afraid of risks that I might undertake. I'd rather take the risk of having a fall than being confined to the house. So when you're making family decisions about risk, things to think about are, as I said before, prioritise your relationship. Not only your relationship with the older person or the person with dementia, by not treating them as if they are a child. This is an adult who must be given the chance to take as much risk and be as involved in the decisions as they possibly can, but also prioritise the relationship with your siblings. It is not worth losing a family relationship over this, and it's not what the elder would have wanted. And that's where enlisting professional help can be really good, because there are people who will work as mediators to mediate the kind of discussions that you may need to have. That's because they can help you with the sorts of things that you have to do when you're communicating with each other about the risks that you want to take, when you're trying to avoid the negative family dynamics that can happen, and when you're trying to harvest all the positive family dynamics. If you have a family, if you have people who want to be involved. I have a friend who cared. She was an only child, and she cared for her parents with dementia right up to the end. And she said that it was awful having to make all these decisions by herself. I was able to introduce her to another person who tried to do caring, but who'd had to negotiate everything with siblings and who found that really, really hard. She said, I wish that I had been on my own with these decisions, because at least I could have got a result more quickly. And so enlisting professional help can help with that. and also considering the individual differences. The research that we did at Stirling just before I retired from there indicated that, strangely enough, men and women who were involved in this research, it's not this, it was only a relatively small cohort. We didn't have time to do the research further. But in our cohorts that we had of about 1,000 people, men and women thought about dementia quite differently. It was so interesting. Men were more inclined to believe that a cure was coming, that social services would give you all the help that you needed, and that it was possible to live independently for longer. Women were much more likely to think that social services would not be adequate. And in fact, the worst finding that we had was that women were in this piece of research were much more likely to think that assisted dying or euthanasia was an appropriate response to dementia, which was so sad for me because it indicated a sense of helplessness that many of the women had about it. So the appetite that people have for risk is quite different. There seem to be some gender differences in the attitudes to dementia and the risk around dementia. And so these are things we have to bear in mind when decisions are being made. So how do we make decisions about risk? Well, the timing has got to be right. You've got to know what capacity the person has to make their own decisions, and you can't take over those decisions when they still have the capacity to make them. And we can talk in a minute about capacity. The other thing is to be really specific. You know, if someone in the family comes up and says, oh, dad needs to go in a care home because, you know, he can't look after himself, be specific. What is it that makes them think that he has to have this restriction on his liberty? And if you're very specific, it might be, well, because he's losing weight and he's not eating properly. So there could be a solution to that specific problem, which is less restrictive than having him lose his own home and have to go to be in care. It could be that there's something that can be done with meals being made for him, with someone coming in to help him eat. It could be that, you know, simplifying what it is he has to do in the kitchen is something that can possibly be done. So be specific about what the problem is. Mum has to go in a care home because she keeps falling. Can we do some kind of proper falls assessment to see whether or not the risk of her being at home can be reduced by increasing the light level, by making sure that she's got a device that will detect when she's had a fall, so that if she does fall, then at least someone can come and make sure that she's safe quite quickly. And so making the decision with a sibling, being specific, is to look at common goals. And so the common goal that you have to agree, you must try and make it the common goal is to keep the person as independent as possible for as long as possible. And sometimes that depends on people's understanding of dementia and also their understanding of what services are like. And I quite often meet people who say, oh, if it's a question of going to a care home, just shoot me. I don't want to go to a care home. I have a completely different point of view because I visit lots of care homes as part of my work. And I've seen care homes I would move into tomorrow because they're like going on a cruise. You get all your meals made, they change your bed, you've got the privacy of your own room. So a care home isn't necessarily a nightmare. So for some people, the goal of going to a care home doesn't seem so bad if you can afford it. On the other hand, some people might think that a care home is like being the living dead. And so it's only by talking to them about why it is they would not want it or they would want it that you would really understand. So you have to open up, you have to listen carefully to what people want, remembering, of course, that includes the person with dementia. And also you have to look for hidden agendas, because people do have hidden agendas around these things, and only you will know, because you know your family, what the hidden agendas might be. But understanding that the people around about you might not know or understand what you know and understand about dementia is really, really important. So how you make decisions, if you're having to make decisions in an emergency at the last minute, that is one thing that you want to avoid if you possibly can. We might be beyond that, but it might be that we've reached the stage where it is an emergency decision. And then the question is, you know, how do you feel when you make those decisions? Do not underestimate how stressful this is for you. And when you look at those things that people have said to me, you know, that they're overwhelmed, they're stressed, they're pressured, confused, distracted and tired, that's how you often feel when you're in a caring role. And to actually make decisions when you're feeling like that is really, really hard, especially realizing that when you throw the dice with a decision, it is chancy, because sometimes it's not the difference between, you know, high risk and no risk. It could be that you just have to go for a low risk option. Sometimes there is no risk, no option that has a zero risk applied to it. So how you feel is really, really important. And if it's not too late, the thing to do is think about forward planning. Now, if this is too late for the person that you're caring for who has dementia, then at least do this for yourself and for other people in your family. And if it's someone with dementia who's listening to this and you're able to think about these sorts of things, start having the conversation now. Communication is really, really important. And one of them is scenario planning. So many times, as I said earlier on, people will say, well, if you were, you know, if I was old and I needed a care home, if I had dementia, I needed a care home, shoot me first. Actually, shooting is not allowed. So the question is, what advice and help are you giving your family about what you should do if that scenario occurs? And when you're working with your siblings, although mum's still at home and she's in her little house and she's managing with a bit of care, you need to talk about what if a care home or home care was required. What if? And sometimes people think that just talking about it makes it happen. I don't want you to be thinking about that just now. You want to drive it into the care home. You want this to be over with. What's your secret agenda? The scenario planning is hoping that it won't happen. It's a bit like when I carry my umbrella in Scotland. If I remember to take my umbrella out, it doesn't rain. If I don't take my umbrella, it pours. So scenario planning is like having an umbrella in your bag when you go out. Forward planning about money and bills, because we said before that money is one of the biggest problems, forward planning is really, really useful. And so in the UK now, and Andrea and others would be able to tell us more about what the forward planning risk things are like in terms of banks. Banks in the UK now are getting much better at helping people with handling the money and the bills of the person with dementia. There are lots of people now, perhaps in their 70s, who are carers for somebody in their 90s who has dementia. And maybe the person in the 70s hasn't been in the habit of having standing orders or direct debits, perhaps not been in the habit of doing online banking. And so they still have to go to the bank. But those of us who are familiar with that must get these things automated as early as possible so that those bills and things can be dealt with. And banks do have special staff who are responsible for people who are vulnerable to help them with that. I have heard stories relatively recently of older people with dementia going to the bank, taking out large amounts of money, which are clearly being given to someone outside the bank who's no business taking that money off them. Banks now are much more careful about asking why the person is taking the money out, what it's for, and making sure that somebody knows if the money looks as if it's being taken off them straight away. And in order to have that relationship with the bank as a carer, having a power of attorney is really, really important. There's a brilliant book in the UK on powers of attorney written by a woman who used to be the public guardian, which is the job of the person who supervises all the powers of attorney here. But there's some hints in there that absolutely apply anywhere in the world, including things like having odd numbers of attorneys. If the attorneyship is being shared between people, that helps with that kind of dilemma where one attorney says A and the other one says B, and there's no one to act as mediator or to get the final decision between them. If you're listening to this and you haven't given power of attorney to someone for yourself, do it now. I've had a really sad story in the last month of a man who was caring for his wife. She was confined to bed. They were a devoted couple with no children. They had power of attorney for each other. And he suddenly died unexpectedly, leaving her there. She's confined to bed and there is nobody who has power of attorney for her. So all her decisions were being made by social services under an emergency. And our social services here are under pressure here, and it took ages to get things sorted out. So make sure it's somebody of the next generation, whether it's a younger lawyer or a younger relative, so that these kind of things can be sorted out without any family fights. Thinking ahead about what you want and what you're thinking about care homes and home care, where to go for further help and advice. So I'm nearly finished now and I'm happy to take questions. As I said before, If if it's difficult to ask questions online, then ask questions later. But there's a very important message that I want to give to people is, if things go wrong, because things will go wrong when you're caring and when you're navigating through the family dynamics of caring for another person, if what you do turns out to be wrong this time, don't forget all the awesome things that you already did right. Things do go wrong. People do fall out. There can be difficulties. I've written these books, which are here, which absolutely are for people who are in the UK, but also people have said that they turn out to be quite useful in other places, but also these ones which are useful for people in other parts of the world, with practical advice for families and caregivers, and what kind of hints and help you can have. Now, there's only so much information that there can be in a book, because as soon as you have your book published, it starts to go out of date. Anything on paper can go out of date. And that's why it's brilliant that you've got the York Alzheimer's Society people, because they are up to the minute. They know what's happening locally in your area. They can listen to you. And believe me, whatever it is you're going through, they have probably seen before. So again, just to say, that's my my website, juneandrews.net. You can go on there and there's a place there for asking questions. And I promise I will return the answers. And I have to say, some of the questions I've had in previous years have been really interesting. If I didn't know the answer and I had to look it up, that was good learning for me. And if I did know the answer, it was no trouble at all in answering the question. Okay, Andrea, shall I give the screen back over to you?
I think that's wonderful. And I love your terminology, a free range older adult. I think that's
what I'm going to be. Yep.
So it is. We're just waiting for the questions to come in, and Sarah's got a couple of people who would like to ask questions. You know, I'm listening to your talk and I'm hearing things. You know, those of us who've worked in dementia care and sort of know sort of the different experiences. You know, I'm single, live alone, and I have put in my power of attorney with my nephew, do not let me stay in my apartment, because I think that would be so frightening for me. And I'm a big gossip hound, so I think I'd like to go to long-term care and sit next to the nurse's station.
Yep.
So that would entertain me, I'm sure.
Yes. And I would love to be that nurse, because you've got stories to tell, and that would be fantastic.
It would be fun. Sarah, I'm going to bring you on here, and you've got, I think, a couple of questions. Or we have a lady with her hand up who has a question. And Jamie, are you able to activate that? The power of technology. We have a bunch of shy people. There you go, Jamie. There's somebody with their hand.
They actually had removed their hand, so maybe they have put it in the chat that they would prefer to ask that way, but the hand has been removed.
Okay. You know, it's a very interesting topic, and when we were looking at topics, risk was something that was front of mind, and I think Tamara's talk, which will be next, which brings that international experience, will be a very interesting topic.
And most recently, when talking to the people who supervise powers of attorney and guardianships here in Scotland, I asked them, what's the biggest issue that ever comes up? And it's the risk that's prevented when you feel someone should retire from driving. Mm-hmm. How do you explain to that person that the time has come? And what do you do if they're not listening? And what do you do if the family has a disagreement about whether or not the time has come? And that's where what it says in the attorney document is quite important, because some attorney documents say that the attorney should be activated when a doctor says so. Some say when a lawyer says so. And other ones in Scotland say when the attorney reasonably believes. So if I reasonably believed that the person I had attorney for really needed to stop driving, then I could write to the authorities and I could arrange for that to happen. But sometimes if it's trying to persuade a doctor to say it, then that can be hard work, because sometimes they're reluctant to make that decision.
Often very reluctant. I've had that personal experience with clients of mine where he's had 2 or 3 accidents. The family knows he should not be driving, but he was a CEO and used to doing everything. So he was cunning enough to go to 2 or 3 doctors to get opinion letters.
Yep, yep.
And he did spend a better part of close to a year writing letters to the transportation ministry. He did a couple of the tests and they wouldn't get in the car with him the second time he went because he had performed so poorly. And it is a huge challenge. When I've worked with clients who are early in the disease and still have the capacity to understand, when they know that insurance is not necessarily going to cover them, even if they pass the ministry test, which has also happened to a couple of my clients because they see the medication list and they see Aricept or they see one of the other meds, then they say this person should not. Okay, so we've got a question. Minnie, would you like to ask your question?
Minnie's on mute at the moment. I don't know if we unmute her.
Okay, I see a question. Minnie, are you there?
I can see a question from Elizabeth, which I could be answering while I'm waiting for
Okay, why
Minnie
don't
to
you
come
do that?
online.
Go ahead.
So Elizabeth has asked a question about who she could use as a mediator in her family to help her push forward the need for a care home. She's the only caregiver and she has 3 brothers and they talk about the cost, but she has investments to cover that. And that kind of question is something that that comes up quite a lot. Sometimes it's the person who's the principal caregiver who knows that the time has come because that caregiver cannot cope, even if they're not doing all of the caring themselves and have some care in the home. There's a huge responsibility for organising and monitoring the care that is being given by paid carers. And so having that negotiation with the brothers, I don't know who would do that locally for you. Andrea, do you have people who would talk about that in a local setting?
Sorry, June, would you likely be a mediator? And we have a list that we could give people. Sometimes it's a family member who is like the uncle or the aunt who is neutral. Sometimes just relaying the cost. You know, family members think cost in the community is cheaper than cost in long-term care.
Yep.
And when you start going $35 times 24 hours times 7 days or times 365 days, we do have clients who do that. And the cost ends up being close to $140,000, $150,000 a year. So that's certainly a lot more expensive than long-term care or even retirement home for some people. And even in long-term care, if they go into long-term care, it's in our area, I think it's about $2,600 a month. So you multiply that times 12, and you can even buy extra care, and it's still not going to get to that $140,000, $150,000 a year cost. And so it is, it's a very big challenge. And sometimes the siblings who are not doing the care or who are far away are not aware of the extent that the mom is needing.
Yeah, and I hear people saying things like, oh, she likes doing that care, you know. There is a gender issue sometimes where sometimes this is a great generalization. There'll be lots of men out there who are not like this and who are horrified to hear me saying it. But I do hear people assuming that this is a woman's job or a daughter-in-law's job or a daughter's job to do this kind of care. And in a world where many daughters and daughters-in-law are actually out doing a full-time job and may well have childcare as well, you would die trying to keep this. You would predecease the person if you just keep caring until you kill yourself with it. And that's where having an attorney who can make the decision is really good. And you telling your family in advance is good.
Sorry, June, I keep interrupting. I've had experience where we've had that situation where family members disagree, and some of the best medicine and the quickest way to get them to understand is say, I have to go away for a week. You need to move in with mom and take care.
Yeah.
And that decision is quickly made. I see now that Minnie is able to ask us questions. Minnie, go ahead, please.
I really didn't have one, but what I would like to talk about is whenever my mom goes to see her doctor, I'm able to take her and discuss her health concerns with him. But if I were to call back when we get some blood work results, the doctor is very hesitant and wouldn't discuss it with me because I'm not her power of attorney. What do we do in situations like that?
So I think that's a discussion for Andrea about the specific issue in Canada, but I can certainly say from the point of view in the UK that there are some doctors who are obsessed with confidentiality. And I have to say to them, who is going to sue you for telling this daughter about her mum's blood work? You don't be silly. You actually have to say sometimes to clinicians, don't be silly. If you don't have power of attorney now and your mum has lost capacity, then it's too late to try and get a power of attorney. The person's got to have capacity when they give it. But depending on how well your mum is, it could well be that she's still in a position to make you one of the attorneys. The other thing is that the person who does have attorney can say to the doctor that they permit you, Minnie, to have access to your mum's medical details. So the attorney could, as it were, say, I am speaking on behalf of Minnie's mother, and on behalf of Minnie's mother, I say, when Minnie is involved in the care, you better tell her everything because she needs that information.
And that's quite right, June. And you know, there are some ways around it. I mean, if it's blood work, most of the blood locations, Lifeline or whatever, Life Labs, you can get all those results put online and you can have a look at them. And many of the hospitals now have a thing called My Chart. So you might want to set that up for mom if you're computer savvy, Minnie. And I think that the other issue, you're quite right, June, doctors are very reticent sometimes to give information out.
Not all of them, but some of them seem to have this block.
Yeah. And I think that the thing, it might be to have when you're in the room with mom, if she's able to converse in front of the doctor, for her to verbally say, I give my daughter permission. So that may help. Thank you, Minnie. Thank you for persisting so we could get through to you. I see there's a couple more questions, and we'll take these two questions and then I think we'll be over to our next person. So one is, what are the typical signs for the end of independent living when a person with dementia shouldn't be living on their own?
So the really bold answer about that is it depends how much money you've got. And if you are an ultra high net worth individual and you can pay for 24-hour care, then the person need never stop living in their own place. But is that what you mean by independent living? Do you mean the person not having care in the place? And do you mean the distinction between going to residential care and staying in their home in the community? So it's different things for different people. Sometimes someone who has their mum living with them in the community, a continence problem may be the thing that is the final straw that they can't cope with. Or if the person has frontal lobe dementia, a behavioural issue that stops you having visitors in your house might be the thing that is the deal breaker for having the person at home. Sometimes it's the neighbours and the local community. You know, the neighbours are constantly phoning you to say they're worried, and that drives you to feel that the person shouldn't be there anymore. And so depending on how what risk appetite you have, the person has, and the local community has, then the person can stay independent for quite a long time. So it's actually quite a complicated question. And I feel there's probably a story behind that. So if you email me with that story, then I can talk to you about that issue and see if there's any pointers there. So it's such a good question. How do you know when the time has come?
Yes, thanks, June. The last question that we'll have before we go to our next speaker is, my sister and I have shared power of attorney for our father who has vascular dementia. The father lives with me and I'm his primary caregiver. Unfortunately, my sister is on the periphery of participating in any decision-making by choice. Is it difficult to remove her as the joint POA?
So you can't easily remove another person as a joint POA. You could go to court and you'd have to give good cause and all the rest of it. You'd have to demonstrate there was a risk to your dad by having her on there. The question I would need to know in order to answer this properly is, what does the power of attorney paperwork say? Does it say that you can make decisions severally? That's what they say in Scotland, meaning, you know, you could decide even if your sister doesn't agree, you know, you could say, I'm going to write to the authorities and take away his driving license, even if my sister hasn't said anything about it. Or does it say you have to do it jointly, in which case you can't write unless she jointly signs the bit of paper? So it's really important, if she's on the periphery and she's not interfering, that's okay. But if she's on the periphery and you need her support, that's different. So again, one of those ones where you could send me a little note and we could have a little discussion about it. But if the core of the question is, can I get rid of somebody's, can I get someone off being power of attorney? The only person who can grant it and the only person who can take it away is the person who's giving attorney. So it's only the dad who can give it. And if he's now reached the stage where he's no longer competent to make decisions, then you're stuck with it.
Thank you. And I would say Canadian context is very similar, June. You have to know whether it's written as jointly and severally, jointly or severally. So it can be, there's a number of computations, and you might want to go back to your lawyer who wrote the power of attorney to read it so you understand completely. And June, that comes to the end, our time with you right now. June will be around towards the end of the day, or the end of the, not day, just a couple of hours. And then, so thank you, June. And we're now going to go to Tamara. Tamara, hello. Dr. Tamara Daly is a professor at York University. She is the director of York University's Center for Aging Research and Education. And she's also the director of SSHRC, Partnership for Age-Friendly Communities Within Communities, International Promising Practices. And that's where I met Tamara. I sit with her on that group, and it's been about 5 years, I think. We had our first meetings at downtown Toronto about 5 years ago, and then the pandemic hit. She was also awarded the CIHR Research Chair in Gender, Care Work, and Health from 2013 to 2018. And her research focus is on age equity and inclusion, access to care, long-term care and international comparisons, gender and health equity, social care policy, quality working conditions, and aged care across international cities. So that's a lot, but wonderful. Thank you, Tamara. And she's going to talk about dementia, risk, dignity, and joy. So thank you very much, Tamara.
Thanks, Andrea. Okay. So I think you can see my screen. Is that right? What a pleasure. Great. What a pleasure it is to be here with you today to discuss issues related to risk, dignity, and joy. So as a professor of health policy and equity, I'm focused on access to care for older adults and also on decent working conditions for care workers. And I've spent the last 2 decades researching alongside excellent teams of colleagues studying long-term care and community-based care. So today, I'm going to start by describing the older adult care continuum in this province. I also identify what I mean by paid and unpaid care work, and also about how those types of care stretch from homes and into residential and long-term care facilities. I'd also like to touch on how care constellations differ depending on people's individual circumstances, and provide sort of a high-level overview of the range of the types of care that are provided. Then I'd like to talk about some potential issues, and some of these may resonate more with some of you than others, or you might feel as though some are more present in your life than others. But these potential issues include system level issues, medical issues, social and personal issues. I'd then like to share a digital story that comes directly from our research project, and the story is about quality of life. After that, I'd like to talk about this line between risk, dignity, and joy, and then end with another video from our research project that deals specifically with matters for dementia care. So our studies then. So my work in the area of supports and services for older adults is focused on community support services, and that really began about 23 years ago. And in this first study, I documented how over a 40-year time horizon, the province of Ontario had limited its supports to community-based services. And at that time, it emphasized the most medically oriented services And it started to underfund social supports and home maintenance supports like cleaning and meal preparation. So it was during the period of the 1990s that we saw some of the biggest shifts away from being able to provide folks the types of home maintenance and community supports that were really enabling them to live longer independently. So in that research, I documented what the shift also did in terms of contracting out the model of care for home care, and how larger and larger providers started to compete for contracts for those home care services. And as a result of that, we then saw a shift over time to lowering the costs and the way that the labor force was being paid, and providing jobs for folks who were doing home and community support services without benefits or protections for their own work. So during that period of time in the late 90s, there became a growing gap between what the formal healthcare system was providing to folks to remain independent in their own homes as long as possible, and also then what the smaller community organizations were able to do with their friendly visiting programs, their Meals on Wheels programs, because their own funding was being cut short as well. So the challenge, I would argue, was aptly summed up for me by one organization that noted when its friendly visitors would arrive in someone's home, ready for a cup of tea and a chat, the clients would ask for things that the visitors were completely unprepared for. They would say things like, "Could you just help me buckle up my bra strap, dear?" Or, "I'm having some real problems getting the sock on. Could you just give me a little bit of support with that?" So these were the sorts of things that were formerly a regular part of our home care system. But over the past 20 years, what we've seen is a lot of constraints in that system and fewer supports and services that are available to folks. So during this time as well, the community support agencies, their funding was a mix of fundraising, user fees, federal and municipal and provincial grants. But it was the provincial government that had moved their oversight to the Ministry of Health, and they started to demand that these organizations provide very discrete types of services. So we saw also a shift from the kind of problem solving and ability to holistically look at the challenges that people were facing in their home to one where it was about the provision of very specific services in ways that were standardized. So having noted these significant gaps in the system that were created by the introduction of competition, the things that were happening to our home care system, and also the government's desire to manage its funding by imposing these really strict conditions on organizations, we then began to document also the challenges that were associated with people being able to access long-term care facilities. So, so that would include being able to actually get a bed in a long-term care facility. But then once in long-term care facilities, their experiences in relation to understaffing, the working conditions, the overwork, and some of the poor conditions of care. So we spent a couple of years documenting extensively some of these conditions. So our research is international in scope. We've traveled across Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, the US, and the UK, including Scotland, observing home care, community supports, and long-term care on the front lines. We've surveyed workers and conducted thousands of hours of in-depth interviews, and thousands of interviews, in fact, with frontline care workers, with support staff, with families, with residents, with volunteers, and with managers. We've sat in cars for long hours with home care workers as they dashed from one client to the other. And we've done observations in community support organizations as these organizations try their hardest to provide the sorts of supports that people need in order to perhaps engage in their own paid employment during the day, because they're looking at caring for older adults in the evenings. So after focusing so much on some of the challenges, and that's represented here by the purple book, They Deserve Better, we really wanted to start to focus on the promises, the things that work well in different contexts, and how we might be able to port those promising practices to our own province of Ontario. So for the last 20 years, we've been conducting these comparative research studies internationally to show the practices, the policies, and the programs that are used elsewhere and can usefully be adopted here in order to improve care for older adults and also to support those who are providing their care, whether they're paid or unpaid. So we've documented myriad promising practices and policies, and these are the sorts of policies and practices that bring dignity and respect to residents and to folks with dementia, to people who are aging, but also decent work for their care providers. And we've shared this research widely. While there have been some improvements, we all know that COVID has exacerbated any existing challenges in the system, and we cannot take those lightly. So if I think then about the system and I try to situate Ontario's long-term care, adult care continuum, it looks a little bit like this. So folks generally move, and it can be a forward and backwards movement. But we have these kinds of community support services represented by day programs and Meals on Wheels, and older adult centers where people go to get social support, to engage in programming, to do fitness and activity. Then we have more formal home care services in the form of home care services. And some of those are funded by the provincial government, but not all of them. And so oftentimes families find themselves at the point where they're needing this kind of care, that they are not getting enough, and they're having to look to pay privately for additional support. Some are lucky enough to make their way and to get a space in a supportive housing unit, and those are funded by the provincial government in part, or they could find themselves in what is being referred to as a naturally occurring retirement community. And these are places where it just seems that there are more older adults living there, and it's just by chance. But as a result of that, our home and community care agencies have found ways to try to provide supports on site. So these would be the types of places where there are more older adults living in the building than you would expect, and that there's some general space in the building, some meeting space, where agencies are able to go and to provide services on site and in a way that is more coordinated. We also know that people move to acute and rehab hospitals for a variety of conditions. And usually then the push is either to residential long-term care or a retirement home, or back into the home in order to get the supports. But there is an aggressive push to move out of acute hospitals as well as rehab hospitals because the supports are insufficient. Okay. Now, there's also an assumption that once we move forward in terms of care and facilities, that is where paid care work takes over. But the truth is that there's paid care work that happens in the home. So when home care workers and nurses and other folks are coming into the home to provide supports, and family and friends are doing that as well. But this sort of unpaid care in Ontario follows people into facilities. So one of the challenges that we have with our system is because of understaffing, families still feel under a large burden in order to provide some of the care that they were also doing in the home care environment. So when we think then about the types of care work, because these can range, and different family members and different friends may be taking on some of this, and others may be doing other things. But it can really range between the physical and the bodily care, so the grooming or helping with toileting, or things like purchasing food, doing the prep, even assistance with dining, so helping someone with their dining needs, but also the cleaning of homes, the cleaning of rooms, mobility and transportation needs. And this is often one that comes up in our interview and our research as being particularly problematic because it involves so many aspects of coordination. There are the pieces related to emotional, psychological, and behavioral needs. And this can range from interpersonal or feelings that are happening. It can relate to cognitive and neurological behaviors, some things that family members are doing that are uncharacteristic for them, and their interactions perhaps with paid care workers have become fraught with incidents that get referred to as behaviors. There's also the social care work that involves connection, trying to think about ways of creating belonging, providing supports, understanding, thinking through issues around dignity. The financial piece is no small part of that. And I think June talked about that a lot in terms of, there are bills, there are taxes, there are finances, but it's also related to the opportunity cost that family members or friends might be experiencing, like they're no longer earning, or they're not being able to spend money the way they thought they would because they have to pay for the additional costs of care. And this particularly happens when people assume that the care will be available and it doesn't materialize, or it doesn't happen the way that they assume. It's also about organizational work. There's the scheduling of care, finding and paying for care, waiting for care to arrive, and the medical piece of it, the bills, the appointments, the follow-up. Now, not everyone has the same care constellation, and I refer to it as a constellation quite specifically because if we place the person living with dementia at the center, they may rely on family, social workers, personal support workers the most. They could have privately paid workers that are coming into the home as well, nurses that pop in and out, but also be reliant on lawyers or physicians, friends or neighbors. But not everyone's care constellation looks the same. And it may be that they're getting support from different groups. And it also is important for us to remember that not everyone has additional family members who are able or want to take on care responsibilities. And so the idea that, we all have those same sorts of constellations and those resources to be able to rely on is one of the flaws of our system, because we do have a system that assumes that family will take on most of the burden of care. So June also mentioned gender. I cannot do this talk without talking a little bit about gender, because Canadian women do most of the care work, both in its paid and its unpaid forms. So when we look statistically, 57% of the elder care is performed by women. Women are also spending more time on domestic work, so on a weekly average, and they're spending more time doing childcare. What this also means, though, is that some folks who are doing elder care are also sandwiched in the sense that they have other care responsibilities. So there may be other members of the family that they're providing that care work to. And when it comes to the paid care workers, 90% of our paid care labor force, so social workers, nurses, personal support workers, and cleaners, are women. So care is a woman's issue, and it's something that, whether we want it to be this way or not, it is something that falls disproportionately on women's shoulders. Oxfam says that if we were to calculate the value of this unpaid care work globally, it's 10.9 trillion, which is an astronomical amount, and it underscores the fact that people cannot perform paid care work without this unpaid work that is being done by women. The sad thing is that most of this care work is undervalued. So in its paid forms, often we are not paying well for the paid care work. There are no benefits or sick leave associated with this work, and things got much worse after we moved to competitive models for home care contracts. And we also have weak caregiver leave support. So for folks who are in paid employment, being able to pop out and provide that care is often difficult. So it's difficult for people to leave paid work and to get that support. In its unpaid forms, women are more often the ones who leave or stay out of the labor market more often in order to be able to provide that care. And as a result, in later life, women also then have weaker pension and retirement benefits, and this puts women at financial risk later in life. So some of the issues then, some system level issues, and these questions might resonate with you. How do we get more care? Will care be there when we need it? Where can we get more support? Can we afford it? Where will we live? Will it be good enough care? And is everyone being treated equally? For instance, do they understand our specific needs? And those might be related to gender, language, culture, sexual orientation, level of education. There's a variety of different equity issues that come into play. And what happens in our system if we need more help than is routinely provided? So these are some of the system level issues that present risks to us as individuals who are embarking on this, the relationship in terms of care. There are also medical and health issues that come into play. How can we manage these systems or symptoms rather? What happens next? Can medications help or not? What are the options? And what if there's violence or aggression? So these are some of the medical or health issues that present risks to carers as they're trying to navigate the care system. There are social issues as well that people are presented with. So how will we cope? Where do we go to ask for help? What will happen to our own friendships? Will we stop doing the things we planned and enjoy? And then there are the personal issues. So where do I get to have a break? Why should I be the one to do this type of care? Because you often hear family members say, I'm perfectly willing to make meals, but I'm not willing to do the toileting, or I'm not willing to be the one who waits for the home care providers to come, especially when they don't come as scheduled. Will my employer understand? How can I juggle? And this particularly comes up when people are thinking about the variety of other care responsibilities that they have. What does this mean for my own health? And what if something happens and I can't manage it? In other words, it's too much. So these are some of the personal issues that present more risk for folks, and a sense that they may not have all of the answers or feel that they have solutions. And finally, one of the issues is, what do you do if you feel burned out? So I'd like to now play this video, and I'm hopeful that it plays properly. So when it comes to risks, we have to also think about the risks that that add up in terms of the risks to dignity and joy. So is risk safety then, and how do we balance safety alongside dignity and joy? So risk is sometimes understood as safety, and many decisions with and for older adults are made with the notion of keeping harm at bay. We all live our lives with different levels of tolerance for risk. COVID made it evident that not everyone shares the same notion of personal risk or community risk, or even has the privilege to avoid the worst risks. As older adults reach that point in their lives when they require more supports, one of the challenges that they face on that journey is when their world gets reduced to a series of risk calculations. So how do we balance safety with dignity and joy? The best examples I have are the sterile environments of the North American nursing home. In an attempt to make things safe or to free the institution from risks, many nursing homes remove all that brings life and pleasure. But some nursing homes, and these are the most promising ones, they take a different path and they struggle with the challenge. That is, they learn to walk the line between risk, dignity, and joy. They understand that they must balance communal risks, dignity, and joy against individual ones. So the best homes seek to take risk into consideration, but also to focus their efforts on joy. One of my favorites in this province had a mechanic living on the dementia unit. They moved a van that was no longer operational into the enclosed yard. They removed its hood, and the man was allowed to tinker at will on the engine. They had set up also a men's shed alongside the dining room that allowed him to go through and sort and tinker and go out to the vehicle. They had coats always by the door, sun hats, coats in winter, and the door remained unlocked because the yard was enclosed. They held car washes as an activity in the summer for the other residents who enjoyed it immensely. The van stays in the yard to this day, although the man no longer lives there. It was a way of communicating that this man needed to be able to do the sorts of things that gave him pleasure and joy. The best places also recognize that what gets deemed a medical risk, such as consuming maybe too much salt, makes no sense if you take no pleasure in eating food, say, for instance, without soy sauce. So if you're not taking any more pleasure from the food, it makes no sense to follow a strict adherence to a no salt rule. It takes the joy and the dignity away from the person. So care that tries to make up then for the failures of the system, that a sense of understaffing and overwork, that care can also bring dignity and joy to folks, particularly when it provides good working conditions to ensure that people have the time and the opportunity to provide good care to the best of their abilities. So here we have to think about the ways in which the system enables that good care to happen. When we don't resist these system level issues that are unfair, we can allow a form of care that is quite limited, unsupportive, and undignified to flourish. Instead, I would argue that we need to collectively resist this uncaring system. We need to fight for the supports and services needed by people living with dementia, as well as their family members and their friends who provide their day-to-day care, but also for the formal care providers who need to have good working conditions in order to be able to stay in this work and do the good care that we expect of them. So Atul Gawande says, a few conclusions become clear when we understand this, that our most cruel failure is how we treat the sick and the aged, and that's the failure to recognize that they have priorities beyond merely being safe and living longer, when that chance to shape one's story is essentially to sustaining meaning in life, that we have the opportunity to refashion our institutions, our culture, and our conversations in ways that transform the possibilities for the last chapter of everyone's lives. And he also says our ultimate goal, after all, is not a good death, but a good life to the very end. So I'd like to now share this. And I would just like to say, so that was done in partnership with one of the Alzheimer societies in Canada. And it was our privilege to be in a room asking those kinds of questions with so many folks who support people living with dementia and their family and friends. And so with that, I'd just like to turn it back over to you, Andrea, and I'm going to stop my share.
I need to turn my sound off so you can hear me. Thank you so much, Tamara. You know, so much, I've sat in with you at these meetings, but to see, and I've read your promising practices, but to see you present amazing. So thank you for presenting that. You know, the thing that's stuck with me is that $11 trillion, I think it was that you quoted. It's staggering, absolutely staggering. And I do love that the last one, and I'd love to be able to share that on our website if we have your approval. And I'm putting you on the spot, so because
you're the first ones to see it, Andrea. It's hot off the presses.
Oh, I'd love to share that because it speaks so much, and it's what we hear in practice. The support, the timely support, and transportation in York Region is so challenging. Supportive housing, all of these things, it rings true to your research rings true to what we hear in the community for sure. So I'm going to open the question. I see we have maybe one question. Do we have one question in the Q&A? This is from Felicia, who says, I would like to very much ask Dr. Daly a question and provide some comments. So can we unmute Felicia so she can talk?
Can you hear me?
We can, go for it.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I do want to give a great amount of gratitude to everyone that's speaking and presenting. This is a wealth of a wonderful information. It's been a difficult, challenging journey, and this has been tremendously helpful. Dr. Daly, am I saying your name correctly?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I cannot believe in a half an hour, you have beautifully articulated everything that I have experienced, gone through, observed. You've explained everything perfectly. You've been bang on and on point. It's a relief. It's like, oh my God, I'm not losing my mind. I am being heard. And the challenges that I'm facing at the long-term care home, I wish you could present and educate the leadership, the nurses, the PSWs with everything you have shown us today. Because I am nonstop advocating for my mom. And if I didn't, she'd be lost in the system, ignored, and this dignity and joy would not happen. And it has been exhausting, stressful. I've made many sacrifices. I don't have a personal life, all to advocate, support, and look out for my mother. And I will continue to do so as long as I'm living. Because the model, I won't say all the long-term care homes because I've not experienced or been in all of them, but the one that my mom is in, I'm afraid of me when I need care and where I'm going to go. So I want to say thank you for putting this presentation together. I just wish you could go into that home and present this to them.
Well, thank you for your comments, Felicia. I think that the reason that I'm so passionate about this work is exactly what you've just said. And for me, it's about making sure that the residents get the care that they need, that families feel that they still get to be family members, that they are not having to step in and do as much work as it seems like you're having to do. And that those who are providing the care, those nurses and PSWs, aren't so overworked and overburdened. And they're recognized, their work is recognized by our system. Because one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that in many of our homes in Ontario, not all of them, but in many of our homes, we do have like conditions that are untenable, and we have mediocrity. Now, the home that I talked about with the van is a home in Ontario, and I have several in Ontario that are among my favorites from around the world. And I've spent time in long-term care facilities from the Nordic countries to Australia. So from the top to the top of the world to the bottom. And I have to tell you that it's possible. It is possible to have very, very high quality care but it's one of those issues where it takes a village, and there are lots of us who keep pressing, but it's awfully difficult to do when your mom's needs are right in front of you. So I can also say that we've got your back. I don't know if that helps at all, but we do try each and every day to keep this front of mind, in front of the media, in front of politicians, and we keep pushing for better working conditions, better care conditions, and better living conditions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Felicia, for bringing that to the front. And, you know, if you're not connected to the Alzheimer's Society of York Region, we do have support groups for family members with people in long-term care where we can talk about those issues. We have social workers who might be able to advocate on your behalf if you're in York Region. And many of the Alzheimer's societies across the province can also offer you support. And I know that we are constantly, as the Alzheimer's societies, presenting things to the government about how to provide better, more appropriate. And, you know, I love that use of joy and dignity, because that is what we're trying to provide to people who are living with dementia. So thanks, Tamara, and thank you, Felicia, for raising that point. Does anyone else have any more questions? And Felicia, you are not alone. There's a lot of people who have that same experience.
Okay, thank you.
We hear this in support groups when people come to us or finally get connected to the Alzheimer's societies. You know, one of the problems that we have in York Region is we don't have a lot of medical supports. We don't have a memory clinic. So people often are not diagnosed until they're well into the disease. And families sadly are coping on their own and they don't know about us, or they don't know to call us if they, you know, it's got that A word at the front of it. We do work with people who have all sorts of different dementias. So all I can say, I'm going to do my advertising. Please reach out so that we can either connect you to the right people. Tamara, your books, are they available on Amazon or at York University Press? Or
Yeah, so they're freely available, in fact. They're available, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, they are also available on Apple Books. But if you visit the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and you put in any of the titles, the Promising Practices for Long-Term Care is the first in the series. You can download it freely there, or you can click on the links for Apple and Amazon and they're free. Yeah,
that's wonderful, Tamara. You know, the wonderful thing too is we have recently just entered into a more solid relationship with York University. I mean, Tamara and I think it's been 5 years that you asked me to sit on that committee. But we now have, through a benefactor with York University, a dementia chair, the Helen Carswell Dementia Chair, which is going to be looking at day programming and community programming, much like the way Tamara has looked at the long-term care. So we're very excited about that. And that work is just getting underway. So if you're interested, please reach out to me or Jamie, and maybe we can connect you to some of the research opportunities. Do we have any other questions? I don't see any, Tamara. So you've done such a good job explaining everything.
I do see one note there that says, is there supposed to be sound? So I'm really worried that people couldn't hear me, or the videos. Could you hear the videos? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we were good towards, they cut in a little late. I think that's just tech stuff. June, welcome to come back. If anybody has any questions, Jamie has a short presentation on the Finding Your Way program to describe it. So thank you, Tamara. Thank you, June. So I'll let Jamie do her talk now, and then we'll all come back and we can answer questions. So Jaime Cruz, who is our public education coordinator, she organized the talk. She comes up with the ideas, which is amazing. And I've known Jamie for a very, very long time. She started work here when she was a baby, 1987, 1988, 98. You were a
97.
97. So she was actually part of the hires that came with the first Alzheimer's strategy way back in the 90s, where we were able to expand services. And Jamie came to us, and she's worked in our programs as a program worker, as a senior program worker, filling in for the manager. And at about 2018, she transitioned over to this First Link, public education courses. Sorry, I'm getting confused. I get very excited about the talks. And Tamara and June sent me off on a tangent. But I want to introduce Jamie. She's going to talk about the First Link program, not First Link. Oh, goodness gracious. Finding Your Way talk. And I'll just be quiet now. So Jamie,
Great.
take it over.
Great. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen with everybody. Okay, so thank you so much, everybody, for joining the Alzheimer's Society of York Region Finding Your Way webinar. I want to thank Professor June Andrews and Dr. Tamara Daly for sharing so much of their knowledge about Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, and how we can continue to learn and to support individuals and their care partners on this journey. And this is what has really brought forward what Finding Your Way is. So what is Finding Your Way? It's really looking at how we as a community can help individuals who are living with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias safe, how we can hopefully prevent a missing incident. What can we do to help individuals? What are some things that we can implement within our community to make sure that our clients, our residents, our family members can live independently within our community and be safe with as minimal risk as we can? We want to make sure that we as a community are best here to provide the support that is needed. So what is dementia overall? So we see that dementia is not necessarily a medical term, and it is describing a series of symptoms that individuals are experiencing with a variety of different diagnoses that they might have, Alzheimer's disease being just one of the many that individuals are being diagnosed with. As individuals do progress, we do see that there are many deteriorations with cognition, judgment and reasoning, communications, behaviors. We see that each person is quite unique on this journey, and that each person will display symptoms very differently from one another. We often use the term umbrella when we are referring as dementia, because each spoke represents a different type of dementia that is being diagnosed. There are over 100 different types of dementia that are being diagnosed, but we're going to look at just 5 of the more common ones that you may be familiar with. So Alzheimer's disease definitely represents the most common type of dementia that is being diagnosed. We see that memory is definitely one of the first symptoms that is being indicated by family, that they are starting to notice a change. We also see that with vascular dementia, the second most common type, that with this particular dementia, we do have the ability to hopefully prevent this particular type, because it's all about how we take care of ourselves. It's about how we watch our diet, about our exercise, how much we exercise or if we don't exercise. It's about our series of if we are maintaining a healthy lifestyle. We want to make sure that we are visiting the doctors. What we see with vascular is that it's a series of strokes. It's what we call TIAs, mini strokes, and it's about a lack of oxygen that can get to an individual's brain. And we also see Lewy body. Lewy body often represents a lot of the same symptoms that are associated that we see with an individual who is living with Parkinson's disease. We see that an individual may experience some of the same challenges with movement. We see that there are difficulties with articulation of words and communications. One of the more prominent things we do see with Lewy body are that individuals do show signs of hallucinations. We also see that individuals who are living with Lewy body might not tolerate some medications as some of the other individuals who are being diagnosed with other types of dementia. We also see that individuals are being more diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia. And to just shed light on this, we've recently just heard that the actor Bruce Willis was just diagnosed with frontotemporal. And one of the things that had come out early on was that they had noticed that he was having increased difficulties with his communication, which was his aphasia, the inability to articulate words and express himself. We also see that there are changes in behaviors, in emotions. We see that individuals who are living with frontotemporal dementia, that they are quite younger than individuals who are in their 80s and 90s. We also see that there are some types of dementia that are treatable, and these are just some that we need to be aware of for the fact that we can actually treat symptoms that are associated with all of these, that we do need to understand what the baseline is of our families, and that when somebody is having some challenges with some medications, that they aren't taking too much or they aren't taking it at all. That we also want to be aware of any types of infections that our families might experience. One of the more common things that we tend to see are when individuals might experience a urinary tract infection. All of these are able to be treated with the assistance of a medical physician. And what we do need to know is that a lot of these diagnoses here do mimic confusion, disorientation, and they can be sudden onsets. So if you do see that there are behavior changes, mobility changes, disorientation, and that it is something that comes on quite suddenly, that you please do contact your physician and explain what it is that you are seeing. So why are we all here and why should we be concerned? Because we want everybody to be aware that the numbers are absolutely changing, and we are seeing an increase of individuals who are living with a diagnosis. They are living with a dementia, and these numbers are specifically to Canada. We are seeing that individuals are definitely living longer, and age being definitely the #1 risk factor. We see that we are closer to 1 million individuals in Canada by the year 2030 that will be living with one type of diagnosis of a dementia. Some of the facts that I just want to bring forward is that an individual can become lost without actually being in an unfamiliar place. What we do know is that most people become lost in a very familiar place within their own neighborhood. And especially with the amount of construction that goes on or cars parked in different areas, we see that the increase of people getting lost is actually starting to rise. When somebody does leave their home or a mall or a store or a place that they are quite familiar with, if they are not found within 24 hours, the risk of them being found injured or have passed has definitely increased. So these are some things that individuals might be experiencing when they are showing signs of going missing. An individual might start to become restless. They are needing a change of scenery. They may feel that they have to continue something that they have already previously engaged in, an interest of theirs. Maybe they're bored and they're trying to look for something purposeful that they need to engage in. They may be looking for something from the past, somebody that they want to talk to, a place that they may have want to be going to. There's definitely showing signs of restlessness and increased anxiety. And we absolutely see that individuals who are living with dementia do show an increased side of anxiety because there's so much uncertainty that they are experiencing. So the more that we can provide that validation and that reassurance, it will absolutely help with reducing an individual's anxiety. We definitely see that sometimes people just need to be out. They need that physical activity. They need exercise. And then we definitely see that an individual can become quite confused with a time, with a person, with the place that they are. So they're wanting to often maybe go home, but home isn't necessarily where they may be. This is where we go back to that long-term memory, and they're trying to get back to maybe their childhood home. So if you do see somebody who might be walking down the street, how are you going to know that they may be lost? Because somebody who is living with Alzheimer's disease or related dementias is not holding up a sign saying, I am living with Alzheimer's disease. So these are a few identifiers that will definitely help with how you can identify that somebody may be lost. Maybe they're inappropriately dressed for the winter. Maybe they're wearing a sundress and it's because they see the sun, but not recognizing that we've just had a big snowstorm, but they're only looking at the beautiful sunshine. Maybe they're standing in one spot, looking around for a period of time, trying to get themselves reoriented to a place. They may be walking back and forth, not sure which way to go, and they could be actually showing a physical disorientation and confusion with their body language and their facial expression. And they could actually be talking to themselves and maybe repeating the same question over and over again. And it may be directing it to somebody, but that person might not know that it is being directed to them. So what are we going to see when somebody might appear lost from the individual? They may not ask for help because maybe they don't recognize that they may be lost. They also might be frightened to reach out. They're not able to actually problem solve within how to find their way back home. Oftentimes when they are found and they are confronted about being lost, maybe within a familiar area, they are not going to actually admit that they were lost, that there was some disorientation and confusion. They may not be able to articulate and use their words to describe where they were, what their needs are. They may not be able to answer what their name is because they have been lost, and it is very traumatic. So they are not able to express themselves the way that they might want to. And oftentimes we see that people might actually start to isolate themselves and pull away. And when we do see this, we really want to be aware and we want to make sure that we are close. If you are walking and you see somebody who does appear to be lost, approach them very calmly. Speak to them from the front. Do not try and sneak up behind them. Making eye contact is really important. It gives them the feeling that you are listening to them and that you have their undivided attention. And you really want to introduce yourself. You want to approach them and explain why you might have approached them, explain who you are, and absolutely maintain patience and calmness at all times. When you are talking with somebody, please use short and simple questions and sentences. We want to make sure that we have closed-ended questions, and we want to allow time for that individual to respond. We don't want to jump in and interrupt them because as they are speaking, they may lose their train of thought, and it absolutely can increase their anxiety and make them more fearful. When you do approach somebody, we really want to listen to what they are saying, not just to their words, but we really want to look at their body language. We want to really look at their facial expressions. We want to actually look at the person, and we want to actually repeat what it is that they are saying so we can understand what they are saying and what they are understanding that we are trying to best meet their needs. And we definitely want to avoid making assumptions or correcting. It's really about joining each person on their journey. It's not about bringing them back into what our journey and what our reality is. It's not going to be the same for them. If you are with somebody and they are lost, then what you can do is definitely check for an identification. So what you can do is, hopefully there are individuals that are wearing this blue medical alert bracelet. And much like the other medical alert bracelets, this has the person's name and an emergency contact. If the person will allow you to, approach and see if there is a phone number on the back that you can call, and that will bring you to an emergency so the person can be reconnected with the family. If the person does not want you to come close, please definitely call 911 still. If the person is showing some anxiety and they do not want you to be close, then just take a step back. And if you're comfortable, just wait until somebody arrives, but staying close to make sure that they are safe and that somebody does come to help protect them as well. And I definitely encourage you to look out for this and check out the Finding Your Way website. It has got lots of information. It's got great modules for you to learn about how to keep your family safe in the community, because ideally we want our families to be at home. We want them to be safe, and we want to maintain strengths and independence at all times. And the Finding Your Way program will definitely help to provide that for our communities. And much like what Dr. Daly had mentioned, the dementia-friendly communities, this is how we can provide a friendly environmental community for businesses, for libraries, for grocery stores, for community centers, places of worship, any place that anybody will go in. We want each person to be able to go in and to feel safe. So if you are part of a business and you are interested about learning more about dementia-friendly communities and what you can do, please let me know, and I would be more than happy to connect you and talk to you about it.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm going to now ask all of our presenters to come back, and we have another 10 minutes or so if we have any other questions. So there we go. The wonder of technology. I think Tamara and I are close. We're in East York. Jamie's up in Thornhill, and June is in Edinburgh. Anyone have any other questions? Wait a couple seconds. This has been a wonderful afternoon, and I really thank you very much for all of you contributing. You know, it's Jamie, I've watched her for so long, so it's so good to see her. These are the new slides too for the Finding Your Way program. I haven't seen them, so they're pretty slides. Thank you very much. We still have 55 people online.
While we're waiting for questions, I could tell Jamie our little story about driving with my 95-year-old dad, driving between villages near where he stays, and we found a lady walking along the road by herself. And it was such a lovely story, because we did manage to persuade her to come in the car. We drove her back to the village and we discovered people that knew her, and it actually started quite a nice relationship because we started having phone contact and things. And she was a lady who was affected, but she was just having a bad day, and that that when she left her house, instead of going into the village, she went out into the country. And so.
You know, this program, the Finding Your Way program, I'm trying to think how many years ago we were a part of the inception of it. I think it was 15 years ago, maybe now. It's translated into 14 or 15 different languages. So you have people speaking languages other than English, which is terrific. And also people explaining things within their cultural context, which I think is so important. And when it started, we did a lot of work with different communities, and Hemel, one of our social workers, did a lot of presentations with the South Asian community. in Hindi and Urdu and a couple of other languages that she speaks. And she was able to tell us of a story of a Punjabi man who saw another Punjabi man in the Markham area. And he didn't look right. This older fellow saw him and said, something is not right there. And he had attended one of our seminars. He was able to get the gentleman to safety, got him, and the police called, and they were able to return him safely to home, which is wonderful, because all too often when people go missing and they don't come back, it is very, very terrible outcomes often. We had a gentleman last year who was talking from BC about the silver alert that they've set up there, or setting up. And his dad's been missing for, I think, 7 years now, and they have not found him.
No.
So it's horrendous.
And just when we really feel that our families and our friends, they wouldn't be part of the missing incident, and without warning, something could happen, and they are not trying to leave. They are trying to go and see somebody or go to a place that has sparked a memory. So it can absolutely happen without warning. And that's why we want to come together. So we do recognize the signs as well as what to look for. If, like you mentioned, June, you are driving along and you see somebody, how can we approach and what can we do?
Sometimes for families, after the first incident has happened, it's so shocking and frightening. But after the first incident has happened, that's when you start thinking about possible use of a locator device, if the person will tolerate it. I already have one on my mobile phone. Find my daughter can find wherever I am. I don't get a piece in a cafe, she'll arrive and say, right, buy me a coffee. But the fact that she's got me used to that technology now means that perhaps one day when it's needed, I won't find it strange to be have a locator device in a way that, for example, my 95-year-old dad wouldn't tolerate that now. He thinks it's weird, wouldn't have it. So everybody's choice is really important. As Tamara was saying, the dignity of the person is really, really important in dealing with those kind of emergencies.
Yeah. And having those discussions, like you had both mentioned, having those discussions as early as possible will most definitely help for you as a family member, but for the individual who is living with dementia as well. So you can get your wishes heard, and so your family can actually be able to provide the best care that you want.
And we learned from our families and even our own personal experiences. When my grandmother went missing 3 times in downtown Toronto after new moves, and we didn't think it would happen, but it did. We were very lucky that she was able to recognize the CN Tower and walk her way home. We don't know how she got home. She was gone for about 7 or 8 hours. And she was also gone in the Eaton Center. We had gone into the washroom. She wouldn't come in. She sat outside. And trying to get people to understand, oh, she's a little old lady with gray hair. Can't exactly remember what she was wearing. She was gone in a split second, but we were able to find her. But, little things like we had pictures of her in our purses, so we could show those to people. She was somebody who liked jewelry, so we were able to get her not a medical alert bracelet, but a very fancy gold bracelet with her phone number engraved, and also a gold pendant with her phone number engraved. She was expensive that way. And then she also wanted, she wanted business cards. So we thought that was weird, but it worked out really well because she couldn't say who she was. So the business cards were little, they were very pretty, and they had her name, and they said, I was from Windsor and now I live in Toronto. So Tamara, go ahead.
Well, it just reminds me of some of the creative ways that people have in terms of not necessarily convincing, but at meeting people where they're at, which is what is incredibly important. So it was important to her to have the business cards. It reminds me of a story from a Swedish nursing home where a woman who had been very accustomed to traveling and was in business in her previous life was absolutely refusing to get grooming and bathing care. And so the staff had come up with a very creative solution where they convinced her that it was her spa appointment. So, and it was really important that this happened because her daughter would come on Wednesdays and would get terribly upset if her mom looked unkempt. And so it was really important to the staff that her daughter feel as though they were doing their best to try to care for her mom. And so when they started announcing to her that her spa appointment was, she would just happily go along. And, you know, I have another story from an Ontario nursing home where the negotiation was over ice cream. So the grooming and bathing could happen as long as there was ice cream on the other side of it. And it worked out perfectly on both sides.
That would work out for me.
That would work for me too.
Good, I think we'll see our futures together, perhaps. We're just coming to the end of our 2 hours today, and I just want to thank you ladies so much, all three of you, for your wonderful contribution this afternoon. We look forward to having you come again, perhaps. And we are going to be posting as soon as we can convert this recorded session, and it will be up on our website. And for those of you in our audience, if you want to go onto our website and put in webinars, you will get to you'll see June in 3 or 4 different talks talking about different items. But we also had a session on driving last year that was really important. And so please join us again, watch us again on the webinars. And Jamie has another session booked for March
31st. So keep an eye out for that. And I will definitely be sharing the flyer and more details as they come again.
Thank you again. Bye for now.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, June, and thank you, Tamara.
My pleasure. Take care, everyone.
As everyone is leaving.